Okay, let's head over and kick her over and see how she sounds. Thanks for tuning into the channel today. And guys, while we're at it, why not swing into that thumbnail and click the subscribe button? It'd be greatly appreciated. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look at what I'm on. I'm on a 2020 500 Trials Works Replica. There's a few ways to look at this. This is either a new bike born old or an old bike born new. Either way you look at it, I would actually think it's a bike that's a little bit, by Australian standards, a bit overpriced at $9,200. I think a better price would have been around that $7,000 price, up around the same price as the Himalayan, but there's not much you can do about that. You just either got to pay it or forget it. It's been about 18 months, I suppose, since I've been on a new Classic 500. This one's a Euro 4, and I'll call it a Classic 500 at the moment because if you look at any of these Enfields, whether they're commemoratives like the Dispatch, Pegasus, they're all Classic 500s, and all they are is a basic Classic 500, different dress, different price, and it's how bad you want to buy one of them. This particular bike, if you compared it to an outright 500, it's really just a single seater with the back peg area removed, and it's also running gaiters. We'll get onto the bike now. So the bike itself to sit on and ride, it's a more of a sit up and bed position, knees forward onto the tank. You sort of look down at all these peasants you're driving past, so you know it's a fairly overpowering look at what's around you. The solo seat, this particular one appears to be nice and squishy or nice and soft, so that's not bad. In fact, I think the seat's a lot softer than previous Classic 500s I've been on. If you're looking at one of these 500s for the thrill of getting on an old bumper for the vibration side of it, well, I don't think you'll be disappointed because this bike feels like it's got a bit of vibration. Not so much in the bars at the moment, but it's got a little bit of vibe running through the foot pegs, that's for sure, on both pegs of that. So that's something that won't disappoint it if you're the purist. Clutch control's good, it's really good as it runs through on the clutch change, and more importantly, it appears so far on this little mini ride I've been on, it's got a really good, for a Classic or for a 500 single, it's got a really good gearbox. I haven't cracked one false neutral yet, and it's been clonking into gears, and these 500 Classics do clonk into gears. It's got the Euro 4 motor, which I always thought in the Enfield was a little bit more peppier than the Euro 3s. Euro 3s were a little bit problem at times. Prior to going out on a run, if you haven't looked at the previous video, I fitted an NGK VP R6ES plug, which I think these bikes run a lot better with that particular plug in them, and this is from several years of doing that, so that's a good idea. I also pulled over my 650 Interceptor mirrors and put on this bike, and I can see up those mirrors not bad at the moment. So I also switched over to it for the running process tiny tack, put one of those on, and I'm cruising out 2800 revs. Wouldn't say I'm cruising, I'm just belting along. I suppose the big question to a lot of people would be, okay, you've got one of these trials, what do you plan on doing? Are you going to take it out and belt it around the paddocks or do a few jumps? And I hope nobody buys one of these bikes with that intention. They think they can go out and do trials runs, because I think they'd be bitterly disappointed. These bikes just aren't capable of that sort of work. You may think you could do it, but I don't think they'd last very long. And what I mean by that, There's always reports of classic 500s that have cracked their frames, and I think if you're going to do anything silly and do jumps on them, I don't think the bike could last all that long. If you want to go coffee, down to the local coffee shop, cruise them, out along the road, do a little riding, just show the bike off, I think it's perfect. I think if you want to run along the odd dirt road, it'll do that quite easy too. But if you're going to get out there and belt along with the option you're going to go and do jumps, don't waste your money. There's a lot better bikes that can do that than this bike. This is more just a classic old show pony, because after all, you're really buying a bike with, like I said, a new bike born old or an old bike born new. This is like a 50-year-old bike you're getting on to ride. You can never confuse with, just because it's the 2020 model, that you are getting a 2020 bike. You are getting something like it was made 50 years ago. Yeah, so the best thing about it, you're getting fuel injection and you're getting a bike you can have a lot of fun with. I tell you what, gee, this is a good gearbox. I don't know what I'd rather have, a good gearbox or less vibes. I don't know, I think I'd rather have less vibes. But you know, a lot of them say it's character, but I don't agree with that, because when you buy these Enfields, it's a luck of the draw. And over the years I've had two really good ones, well, could have been possibly three, that never vibrated at all. And it all boils down to how good they assemble that crank. And if they did a good job assembling that crank, you'll find that very little vibe in the bike. If they did a bad job, you'll find there's a huge amount of vibe in the bike. Just depends on what sort of job they did. These bikes improve a little bit on the run-ins, so you know, they start off as it is now, fairly rough to ride regardless, and they improve as the miles go on. So you take it out, do some short runs on it, and put it through quite a few heat cycles in that early stage without flogging the guts out of it. So you take it out 15-20 kilometre runs, bring it back home, give it several hours to cool down, get back out on it. But you don't take it out and ride it hard and overheat the head, cause yourself a bit of damage, and by that time it's too late and the damage is done. What I have found, that if you do the wrong thing by these motors, you can ruin some of them very quick. With the ABS braking system on Euro 4s, another thing you look at is they take about a couple hundred kilometres to bed in after using it from scratch, and then they come in their own, and the front disc will work a lot better with a bit of bite compared to when you get on it and the first thing's a bit dead. When you look at the gas cap, I had a lot of trouble starting mine from the very beginning. Not this particular bike, the first Euro 4 I had. And the problem was, one, the petrol was full right up to the brim and the tanks don't like it with the pressuriser in the system. And two, when you put the gas cap back on, only go to the first clip, and once it clicks, don't turn it any further. So that's 2 pointers there. Now, this thing seems to be running along all right at 50 kilometres now. It was a little bit rough on the start of the trip to go out, but like I said, I see out the mirrors now all right. But there's no doubt that gearbox on this one's a pretty good box. You might say, what's the big deal about a gearbox? When you get onto these classics, or well, let's say the 500 Works, you always get ones with really bad gearboxes, and they're either got false neutrals, they drop out of neutral, they go into neutral and fall out of neutral. You've got to do clutch adjustments straight off, you know, all sorts of problems associated with their gearbox, because they are really an old industrial type gearbox, you know. So But this one, nice box, nice clutch, good steering. Everything seems to work. Idles along all right. The next question, how does this bike compare to a 650 Interceptor? Well, I suppose in that question it's a hard one to answer because there's really no comparison. Like, this is more a novelty bike. If you've got a 650 Interceptor, you might go back to a classic 500 just for the thrill of wanting one of these, because they're a sort of a fun bike to ride, because you know you're going back a trip back in time on it. But they're nowhere near as good as an Interceptor. An Interceptor's a really nicely refined bike, and you're almost up to a Honda as far as, you know, I'd class it not far behind a Honda CB500. Don't know about reliability, but rideability, you know, it does everything nice when you're on a when you're on the Interceptor, and it's a nice bike to ride, very little vibe. But saying that though, I don't think it's got as much character as this, because where else can you go back on a bike brand new, go back to something that looks like it was made 50 years and get the reliability, a bit of fuel injection tossed in too. So that's the way you've got to look at it with this particular bike. So what about if you asked the choice between this bike and a Himalayan? Well, I've had the Himalayan too, and if you said what would be the best for all-round running and you want to run it around in the bush and that, no comparison. The Himalayan would be a lot better bike if you're going to go that way too, because this is definitely not going to be the bike you think you're going to go out there and do jumps in the paddock and think you're Steve McQueen. Just not going to happen. But it's a better looking bike than a Himalayan, so what would you rather have? And when you get going later on this bike and you run it in properly, you'll be able to get out along the road on this in stock form and sitting on 100 kilometres an hour, and it'll do that pretty easy. The only thing it will kill you in the end, and it won't be the bike, it'll be, if anything, vibration. That's the only thing it'll be a drawback. The worst about these classic 500s, or this Works Trial, or any of the bikes in this C5 range, is how good they put them together at the factory, because they were very inconsistent when they put them together, like with faults in them. Now you might think after listening to this how far I really hate them, but no, I really like the bikes. I reckon they're good. You can get here and have a bit of fun, spin around these corners. If I didn't like them, I wouldn't buy them. I noticed with these tyres on this Trials, the bike sits up a little bit higher than normal. I don't think it affects it that much in the handling. I just feel like I'm a little bit up higher compared to a normal C5. But saying that, I've had bikes with, where I put K70s I think it was, and they too set up a little bit. They too set up a little bit higher. Double down, round this way. Just click through them. One thing about a C5, it swings around the bends a lot easier, I think, than the Interceptor. The Interceptor's a little bit top heavy. I find that when I'm riding the Interceptor, I don't think the balance is as good when you sit there from scratch, or like from a standpoint. I always thought the C5 was a better balanced bike. Could be wrong, it's just the way might be all the years of sitting on the C5, but I feel more comfortable on the C5 plugging it around the corner than most likely I would on an Interceptor. But heated jacket or not, I think I'll be glad to get home today. It's just cold. First time since I've been back into motorcycles that I've bought an open or 3/4 open helmet, or 3/4 I think they're called, a Bell 500, and it's that light you hardly notice you got it on your head. But I only bought it to do talks while I'm riding around with testing these bikes. Might be a little bit clearer, that was the only thing I was thinking about, but pretty good. It's a pretty good helmet, nice and comfortable. I was going to say tight, but it's not so much tight, it's just nice and comfortable on the head, and you don't even realise it's on there. Now that'll end my run on this bike today. I think I've covered everything. Once again, it's your first time on it. These are 500cc single. They put out 27 horsepower. Once run in, they've got a good cruising speed of 100 kilometres an hour. They'll do that quite easy at 100. They're about flat out at around about 130 kilometres maximum. That's about it. You won't get any more out than that, and that's providing you're lucky. Very good on petrol. They can push up around that. In the old days, when the old scale, 80 mile to the gallon. So that ends today's run.